Welcome to Hub 101, the virtual edition. We'd like to show you where the hubs fit in a response situation. So the bottom of this triangle is you and your family or you and your household. What you should do at that level is reconnect with one another. You need to provide for your food and water, shelter, and emergency toilet. And then with your neighbors, you look out for one another. You can coordinate cooking, you share resources. The top of the pyramid is the city services and what their response will look like. They will be consumed with fighting fires because those are very common after an earthquake. They'll be doing the search and rescue in the areas hardest hit by the disaster. And then they begin coordinating the response with outside agencies. So calling in folks to help and trying to figure out where to put them. So the level we haven't talked about is what the community can do to make everyone's life easier after the disaster. And that's where the emergency communication hubs come in. This is where we really shine. This is the gap that we fill in the response after a large disaster. So we are social creatures. After a disaster, we will naturally gather in open spaces and do what we can to make the situation better. And we as neighbors will look to open spaces to gather. Spots like parking lots, ball fields, or tennis courts, any open spot in your community where neighbors would naturally gather. All communities have spots like this. It may not be as formal as a tennis court, but neighbors will find an open area to gather in and they will start helping one another. It's just natural. It's what we do. The hubs are all about trying to take advantage of that natural instinct and help folks prepare before the disaster. When communications go down, neighbors stand up. So when there's no power, when there's no Wi-Fi, when cell phone towers go down, so there's no cell phone signal, the hubs stand up. Let's talk about the Good Samaritan Law here in Washington State. It provides immunity from liability when providing emergency or medical care. The law got expanded in July of last year, 2021. It now states that a person cannot be liable for any act or omission while providing volunteer non-medical care or assistance at the scene of an emergency or disaster. This new expansion of Washington State's Good Samaritan Law should allow you to feel comfortable providing aid to neighbors after a disaster. Neighbors will be upset and confused about what to do after a disaster. And information will be hard to get, especially if the power is down. So hubs gather and share information amongst neighbors. Hubs will get information from neighbors, somebody walking up to the hub and giving them information. The hub can send out neighbors to find out information about what's going on around them. They can ask someone to listen to commercial radio and find out if there's anything being broadcast that would be important to share with the community. And amateur radio. We work closely with ham radio operators in the city, asking them to help us get information so we can post it for neighbors. The ham radio operators can hear from city officials what's going on, and they can also talk to other hubs. One of the things we provide is information. So the hub has an information area. It can look something like this. This is a map that is hooked to a chain link fence and a whiteboard, and on it goes information that would be pertinent to that community. The person that staffs that area is called the information manager. Their job description reads something like this. They need to be able to print legibly and concisely. They need to keep the boards, the whiteboards, and the maps up to date as new information comes in. So maybe something has to be erased and new information put up there. So that's what the information manager does. I'd like for you to pause the video and grab a piece of paper, number that paper 1 through 12, and I'd like for you to write down these jobs as we go along. You don't need to write down the job description, just the title. It'll help you remember them. So number 1 is information manager. We know we need that person to help run the hub. What else can a hub provide besides information? Well, we give folks a place to give or receive stuff, things, gear, food, water. Many of our neighbors won't have put anything aside to meet their needs after a disaster. So if anyone has extra, we can help them share. Again, in the hub, because we need to match needs and resources, we have a resource area. The person that staffs that is called the resource manager. Their job description is to help neighbors find or post things. They look for matches between the haves and the needs, and they keep the system organized and up to date. This is a shoe organizer or a pantry organizer. It hangs up. You see the 3 grommets up the top. Here's a closer look. This pocket is just a label indicating what they're trying to organize. If you had flashlights or headlamps to share, you would put them there. And if you needed them, you would put your slip of paper there. The resource manager looks for matches between these two. This particular system is very flexible. You could mark this pocket water or shelter or pet supplies. Different hubs have different ways of how they organize. I'll show you a resources form. I have 2T diapers. I have 3 boxes of 2T diapers, Huggies brand, to give. They're unopened, and I'll leave them on the front porch. My name is Terry Lopez. There's my address. I won't return back to the hub unless they're not gone in 3 days, in which case I'll return and try it again. And this is the date I visited the hub. So this is one of the forms we use. So on your list, you should have written information manager and resource manager. Those are the first 2 jobs in the hub. So besides gathering and sharing information and giving and receiving stuff, matching needs and resources, we also give or receive people skills. We match people with needs, medical skills, translation skills, cooking skills. Again, in the hub, we have a volunteer area. Anybody that shows up is coordinated by the volunteer coordinator. Their job description is to organize work parties. If there's work that needs to be done away from the hub, they find several volunteers, give them a duty, give them the tools they need, and send them on their way. They also monitor those volunteers to make sure that they're doing okay and they're not getting overstressed or overworked. They collect and organize the forms that volunteers will fill out. And they could be helpful to the educator to answer tough questions, because maybe the educator doesn't know the answer, but maybe someone in the volunteer tent does. So this is the volunteer information form. Denisha Jones filled this out. Here's her address. Maybe she has infrastructure skills or service skills, disaster training. Maybe she can translate. Maybe she has some medical skills, or maybe she has radio capabilities. And then availability is really crucial. We need to know how to get a hold of you, because maybe you're not going to hang out at the hub all day long, every single day. So this person will check in every day at the hub at 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Otherwise, they'll be home. The other thing that a hub can provide is education. How do I drain my hot water tank? What's a rocket stove? And how do I build a twin bucket toilet? Another area in the hub is the education area. And the educator is the one that staffs that. Their job description: talk slowly, clearly, using simple words. We have large posters with a lot of the questions that we think people are going to ask already printed out. The educator also has an education book with, again, a lot of information we've gathered that we think will be useful after a disaster. Encourage folks to take notes. It's very helpful if they can write down what you're telling them as you tell them. If you have tough questions, you just don't know the answer, just can't find it, go to the volunteer coordinator and see if anybody that they've come into contact might know the answer to the question in front of you. These are the posters I mentioned. Most of the hubs have these blown up fairly large: water, hazards, food, communication, and sanitation. So education officer is the 4th job that's available in the hub. The next job I'd like to talk about in the hub is the greeter. This is the person that will meet neighbors as they approach the hub and give them guidance as to where to go, depending on what they tell them. Their job description is to welcome folks calmly and listen to them. Don't interrupt, let them tell their story, and then send them to the area or the person that can help them. Speak slowly and give them one task. Let's talk about the hub manager. This is the person with the overview. Their job description is to monitor the flow of information, make sure the hub is working and that we're meeting people's needs, monitor the hub volunteers, check in with them, find out how they're doing, make sure they're not getting too tired, give them restroom breaks if they need it. They also coordinate the response to the city and to other hubs if that becomes necessary. They're involved in handling emergencies in the hub, so the very urgent situations that will come up. They should also determine the shifts. How long do you think people can stay in their jobs? Can they do that for 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours? And then anticipate problems. If the area where the hub is set up in doesn't seem stable and feels like it might become unsafe, the hub manager needs to be thinking about where to set up tomorrow or where to move to. So on your piece of paper, you should have greeter and hub manager written down. And then start thinking about the jobs that appeal to you, the job or jobs that appeal to you. And let me be clear, you are not signing up to do this job after a disaster. It's just a job you might feel comfortable practicing in. We don't know who will be at home after a real disaster. So there's no way to train for one specific job. You need to understand all the jobs and be able to fill in wherever, but some of these jobs will just naturally speak to you. Let's run a few scenarios. Here's your greeter. Here's your neighbor coming up. The greeter says, "Welcome to the hub. How can we help?" Your neighbor says, "There's a downed power line. I need to tell somebody about it." So where do you think the greeter would tell this neighbor to go? The greeter is going to say, "Thank you for that information. Please tell the information manager." That neighbor has information that everybody in the community should know about. The information manager would take down that information on a form because they need to capture when that information came in and who gave it to them. And then up on the whiteboard for all to see, you're going to see something like this. March 17th, downed power line, 5th and Main Street, avoid. Really clear handwriting, and maybe they would mark it on the map. Here's our second scenario. I need cat food. Where would the greeter send them? To the resource manager. Here's another one. I'm here to help. What can I do? The greeter would send them to the volunteer coordinator. Let the volunteer coordinator figure out what skills they have. We all have skills. We may not think we do, but we all have skills. That volunteer coordinator will be able to record that information and put that person to good use. And then how about this one? I need to learn how to pee and poo because my toilet doesn't flush. The greeter is going to send that person to the education area. Remember those posters? One of those is sanitation. They'll be able to explain how a twin bucket toilet works. Let's go back for a second to that downed power line. The greeter sent the person to the information area to talk to the information manager, which was perfect. The information manager captured that information and put it on the board. But then they also sent that same volunteer over to the volunteer area to tell the volunteer coordinator that there's a downed power line at 5th and Main Street. And so maybe that volunteer coordinator has a couple people that they can gather together, give them some information about what to do, and send them out into the communities to secure that downed power line. You don't do anything with it other than block it off so that nobody accidentally stumbles across it and gets electrocuted. So they go out into the community to figure out what they can do to help. But remember I said the greeter only gives the person in front of them one set of directions. Go to the information area. And then the information manager sent them on to the volunteer coordinator. The greeter cannot give that person two jobs. It's too confusing. There is a lot of activity that goes on within the hub, but the greeter just lays out the first step. Back to the neighbor that reports to the greeter and says, "I'm here to help." They're going to send this person to the volunteer coordinator. The volunteer coordinator will figure out what skills they have and maybe put them to good use. But let's say there's nothing to be done right now. Well, the volunteer coordinator can send that same neighbor over to the resource area. Take a look at the boards over there. Are there any needs over there that you can satisfy? So here's an example again of one of those homemade systems where they're keeping track. This is a sheet, a big white sheet. This is a strip of thick plastic. They've taped it in order to create these pockets. And this pocket is called pet supplies. So the papers back here would be from folks that have pet supplies to give or pet supplies that are needed. So our volunteer walks up to the resource manager and picks up this form. I need cat food. I'll take wet or dry cat food. Please leave it on the porch if I'm not home. I run out in 2 days, so whatever you can spare. And this was written by our neighbor, Ben Smith. And he says, I will come back on the 19th if it's still needed. And this is when he visited the hub. So our volunteer says to the resource manager, I have cat food to spare. I'll take this to Ben if the volunteer coordinator doesn't need me. And the resource manager says, excellent, thank you. The volunteer goes back to the volunteer coordinator and says, hey, I can meet this need if you don't have anything for me. Otherwise, I'll take care of it once I leave the hub. So that's another example of how once you get into the hub system, there's a couple different areas you could visit to help out. Let's talk about what hubs are not. They are not a storage place for supplies before a disaster. This is one of the hubs opened up. Obviously, there is not food and water in this box. It is tables and chairs and canopies and signs and caution tape and a megaphone and lots of paperwork and whiteboards and dry erase markers and maps. It's all gear to help us get organized. It is not food and supplies. I want to point out in the corner of these boxes are locks. This particular model locks in both corners, and multiple community members can open this box and every hub box in the city of Seattle. It's not one person that has the keys or one person that has the combination. Multiple community members can get into this box because we don't know who will be around after a disaster. So hubs are not a storage place for supplies. We work to have neighbors exchange gear away from the hub, back at their own homes. We're hooking up neighbors within the community, but not necessarily at the hub. We don't want people bringing blankets or food or tools to the hub for us to loan out. We want that gear to stay in people's homes, in their apartments, in their condos, and we'll send neighbors that need it to you. But we don't want to have to keep all this gear from getting wet if it's raining outside. Hubs are also not everything for everyone. We see it a lot in drills when people are in that helping mode and they really are going out of their way to do everything for everyone. Manage your time and your energy wisely. Our job is to encourage neighbors helping neighbors, not hub volunteers doing everything for everyone. We're also not equipped to operate after dark. We don't have generators. We don't have extra fuel. This is our next scenario. We have two people coming up to the hub and they say, we have medical training. So the greeter says, great, go talk to the volunteer coordinator. And the volunteer coordinator says, I have a job for you folks. I would like one of you to be the medical officer and one of you to be the visiting nurse. Those are two more jobs within the hub. Obviously quite specialized. I'm not going to go over their job description, except to say that the medical officer is going to coordinate any medical resources that come up. Anyone with healthcare training will probably go to the medical officer to be dispersed somewhere. And the visiting nurse is exactly what it sounds like. That's the person that would help coordinate care for folks that can't come to the hub or can't visit a first aid station. Make a home visit, assess and see what's needed, get the neighbors involved, because the visiting nurse can't be everywhere and do everything, and help deliver that nursing care out in the person's home. So these are the 8 roles that we've discussed so far within the hub. Our next role is the message taker, kind of right in the center of the hub. This is the job description for the message taker. You're going to help neighbors fill out forms as needed. We expect many neighbors to be shaken after an earthquake, and maybe their handwriting wasn't great to begin with. Well, it's worse now. And we can't help them if we can't read their handwriting. So the message taker is really crucial for this. They help neighbors fill out forms. They stress legible handwriting and complete information. They check all forms for legible, complete information. And they send the neighbor and the form to the appropriate hub person or hub area. So sometimes it's the message taker actually filling out the form for the person, but other times it's allowing the neighbor to fill out the form, but stressing that it needs to be legible and complete. If we don't have good information, we can't help them. So that's the job of the message taker. 2 additional jobs in the hub are the radio assistant and the radio operator. The radio operator sends and receives radio messages, documents legibly on an ICS 213, which is just a form we use. He gives that paperwork to the radio assistant, and he also transmits messages as directed by the radio assistant. The radio assistant is the liaison between the radio operator and hub personnel. They give complete and legible ICS 213s to the radio operator to send out. They also prioritize the messages to be sent out. They log all messages in and out, and they share as needed information with the information officer and or the hub manager. They also help ensure all outside requests are answered. If the city or another hub would like information, the radio assistant helps get that information sent out via the radio. The radio operator needs a ham radio license to send messages, but anyone can listen to radio traffic if you have the right kind of radio. And the radio operator needs quiet. We tend to put the radio operator at a distance from the hub to keep that environment quiet. The radio assistant's job is to protect that radio operator and keep the public away so that they can hear the information coming through their headset and they can write it down as it comes. It's difficult to pay attention to the radio message coming in if you don't have a quiet environment. So your list of jobs within the hub should include those two. So now we're up to 11 jobs. And the last one we need to talk about is the reunification officer. This job is still being developed, but we believe it'll be important. The reunification officer's job is the go-to person for missing people and missing pets. They keep the missing people and missing pets boards current, and they could potentially initiate searches with the volunteer coordinator if that would make sense. So your list of hub jobs should include all 12 positions. This would be ideal for a hub to have all of these positions staffed and functioning. It won't always be the case, but that's the ideal. Hopefully one of those jobs appealed to you and you would be willing to raise your hand and perform that job, whether it's in a drill or it's the real thing. Let's talk about when do you go to the hub. This is the order of events the way we see them. After an earthquake, you're going to check on those around you. And that's folks in your home, folks in the building you're in, folks at work, folks near you in the grocery store, wherever you happen to be. Check on those around you. And then take control of your utilities. Again, whether you're at home or in a grocery store, make sure someone is handling natural gas and the water. Reach out to family and friends using a quick text. You want to send them information about where you are, how you are, and what your plan is. And don't forget to include the time and the date in your text. Check on neighbors, especially if no one else is. If that search is ongoing and folks are being taken care of, then you're free to go to the hub. Pack up whatever gear you think you might need and walk to the hub and set it up. So we're looking at roughly 2 to 5 hours after the disaster before the hub might be open and functioning. We've tried to make opening the hub and getting it up and running as easy as possible. Most of the hubs have a startup guide that gives you guidance on what to do for the first couple hours of the hub running. Many of the hubs have a layout map that gives you a good idea of where to set up the different areas, like the information area and the resource area. Where would you like volunteers to congregate? And then we've also included in the boxes things like a megaphone, so you can help the crowd of people that have gathered get organized. But some of this is improv. It's not all spelled out. A lot of it will depend on the situation and who shows up. Remember, the goal is helping neighbors. It is not perfection. There's very little a hub could do wrong. There's very little a hub volunteer could do wrong. We're all trying to make the situation better. So don't be afraid, jump in, you will do a wonderful job. We'll go through one last scenario. A neighbor has come up to the greeter and said, there's a nursing home nearby that needs help moving patients to the ground floor. In this scenario, many people in the hub could be involved. Obviously, the volunteer coordinator. They're probably going to get a couple volunteers together to go over to that nursing home and help move patients to the ground floor as safely as possible. The medical officer and the visiting nurse might be involved in that, just in case there are any medical or nursing needs in the nursing home. And then most definitely the resource area. The resource manager might be able to get a handle on what resources that nursing home is going to need and start putting out the call sooner rather than later to help out that nursing home. We hope this video has been helpful and that you feel more comfortable getting involved with Seattle's emergency communication hubs. Contact us at seattleemergencyhubs.org. You can sign up for our newsletter so you get information about upcoming drills. You can also find the hub closest to your home or closest to where you work. Reach out to us. We're here to help. And please get involved with your neighborhood community hub. Thank you very much.